everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another video where I answer your genealogy and DNA test questions. As usual, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer in one of these videos, be sure to post it to my subreddit r/GenieVlogger. Now, I haven't done one of these in a little bit, and I don't really have a main reason why, but I'm just getting back to it now for this video. But I'm planning to do a live video where I'm going to try to answer a bunch of them. I might do multiple live videos. So comment down below if you'd like to see that. I'm hoping that will give me the ability to be able to get through a bunch of these questions, because some of the ones I'm answering today go back almost 2 years, which is kind of a ridiculous time, and I don't even know if these people are still watching my channel. Let's jump into it. British, Spanish, and African DNA percentages confusion. So the OP posted here for the comments. So just to give a TLDR, because I imagine this is just too much to try to go through, the OP is expecting that they would have 56.25% British, 25% Spanish, 12.5% African, and 6.25% French. They break it down for each side, but that stuff really doesn't matter that much. And then their questions come down to, why are there differences in a sense? So the first one is, the reason I don't have close to 25% Spanish DNA on Ancestry DNA in my heritage due to the fact that they're misreading it with some of my Northwestern European DNA, North African DNA. And then of course they have a bunch, they list some of the obvious possibilities, which this is the problem with a lot of these, is that you ask the questions of, okay, I've done multiple DNA tests. I'm getting slightly different readings. Some of them are on point exactly. Others seem kind of like they are, but they're off in different ways. But maybe does this mean this or does that mean that? The truth is, it's all just a big maybe. I don't know. It could be one of a billion things in a sense, because you just don't know, and it's just giving you a hint. It could be that one site's misreading it, the other two aren't. Could be that two of the sites are reading it better and then one's completely wrong, or it could just be that both of them are wrong in slightly different ways, and then the nuances of why it might be read wrong could vary as well, whether it's just a misread in the actual reading of the DNA snips, the actual markers, or whether it's some sort of missing amount of something, or some incorrect imputation. There's so many things. All right, so that was their first that's basically their first question of, why is it not coming out exactly the same on the different sites? And then they list reasons why they think it might be that way, or could it be this, or could it be that? Could be any of them. We really don't know. And then their last question is kind of the same thing. Also, is the 5.6% Italian 23andMe showing a misread for Iberian, as those regions are connected too? Could be, but maybe it's something else. Could be misread in reading your DNA. Could just be that correlation. Maybe you do have Italian ancestry and the other sites aren't picking up on it. It's multiple things. All that this admixture can help you with is, as you're tracing back your family tree, you might be able to find something that then shows you, oh yeah, maybe this Italian is correct. And then you can feel like that might be a route to take, is researching it. So maybe, you find some name that sounds kind of Italian-ish, and you wouldn't think to maybe look into Italian records or see what's the history of Italy traveling to whatever area that you're looking at. But, if you have this hint of maybe that's it, then looking into that might give you information to then research in a way that you might find that link where you otherwise wouldn't. But honestly, these kinds of questions are the ones that just eat at my soul with trying to make these videos, because all it really just comes down to is, well, why is this reading that I have different than the other readings? But the answer is just always basically, it could be a bunch of things. So, going through this person's results, we have this 92.3% European, and then it breaks down all of this different European. And the thing is every time you get into one of these subregions, the further into that subregion you get, the less confidence you have in the reliability of it. So European, 92.3%. Very strong confidence that, yeah, 92.3% of that DNA is European. Then the next breakdown is Northwestern European, Southern European, and broadly European. So with those next three breakdowns, we have a little bit less confidence, but it's still a larger region. So the confidence is pretty strong that, okay, yeah, 68.2% is probably coming from Northwestern European and 23.7% is coming from Southern European. But then even this broadly European 0.4%, that could just be anywhere in Europe. So it could be assigned to either one of these or something else. But then when you get into the even further, then the confidence is really low. So now within that Northwestern European, the basic explanation could just come down to it's just too difficult to really read this region, and because of the way that the population groups are being defined, it just happens to be that that's how the numbers are coming out and not necessarily a representation of your actual ancestry. But at the same time, maybe it could, or maybe it's somewhere halfway between. And then same thing with the Southern European. So that asking about, well, maybe is this 5.6% Italian actually Spanish or Portuguese? Could be. Or it could just be some Italian ancestor that you didn't know, or a bunch of Italian ancestors. Or it could just be that, it's something else that you're not really expecting from a different side of your family. And so honestly, when it comes down to this kind of guessing game of could it be this, could it be that, could it be this, could it be that, you're not really getting anywhere, because all you're doing is hypothesizing, but you're not testing or researching or doing anything to figure it out further. I mean, yes, that hypothesizing can be helpful in thinking, okay, if it may be this, how could I figure that out within my own family tree? Well, that's a helpful tool. But doing this of, well, could it be this or could it be this? What do you think? Well, doesn't really help beyond just helping lead in that research. Just to look at the other results that the person posted. Here's the Ancestry results. So we have the results in a little bit different of a way. Instead of it being, continent, then region, and then the sub-regions, it's just kind of broken up generally. So England and Northwestern European, 56%, Germanic Europe 13, Wales 9, Portugal 8, Mali 5, Scotland 5, Ivory Coast and Ghana 3, Spain 1%. But then you get your communities, which is really kind of the more important part of this whole thing in terms of the admixture stuff. So, I mean, it's not like super different from what your other results are, but it's also just a variation in the sense that they're also defining everything very differently here. I hope that was somewhat helpful, although I know I was a little snarky and just, I don't know, it's just you get asked the same kind of question in a different way a billion times, and the answer is always kind of generally about the same thing. So hopefully people understand where I'm coming from. But let's jump to the next one. Haplogroup. Hi there, my question is this. Do haplogroups maternal only overlap? In 23andMe, I am RO, and in CRI genetics, it is U4A1B. Would you cover haplogroup for your YouTube followers? I have an extensive family tree and ancestry, but my main interest is in migrations of groups, thus the question on the difference in haplogroup. Thank you. The answer is no, they don't overlap. From what I'm guessing you're saying is basically, can you have, an R haplogroup that all of a sudden becomes a U, which seems to be the case here for you? And the answer is no, but sometimes, depending on your haplogroup, there may be odd situations where the upstream haplogroup from you is a different letter. So just to show you, here I've pulled up the mitochondrial haplogroup tree that is on YFull. So going down the tree, we are going to find R. So here we have R0. So when we click on R0, that's going to bring up everything that is below it. So we have R0, and then we have all of this stuff below it. So you see how it does go from there's R0, then there's also HV, and then when you go down here, there's this R0AB. So you were talking about having U4A, I think that's a 1B. So now when we look it up in YFull, we can see U4A1B. And then when we look up here at the tabs, it goes up and up and up, all the way up to R. Now, I took a quick look just to see what things look like from my end. And while it does seem that this U4A1B is downstream from R, it's not downstream from R0. So we can see R0 is the subclade of R, but then when we look at R itself, here we have R, then we have R again, P, then R0, and then as we scroll down further, we go through all the different R's, and then here we have U. So one of the other things that could also be happening is that one of these companies may have a little bit of a misread in what they're giving you, and especially with a lot of the companies in terms of how they define the haplogroups, if they don't have that much DNA to work with to be able to define it, they can only really get a very general haplogroup. And R0 is a very vague haplogroup, basically. So like looking, where is it again? So going to R0, there's R0, we can see that it formed 20,000 years ago. So 20,000 years before present, and then to the most recent common ancestor, more than 20,000 years before present. That was when R0 became a mutation that then every single descendant of R0 then received, at least in terms of the mitochondrial lines. So every single woman, when she had a child, their mitochondrial would have been downstream of this R0. Whereas over here with U4A1B, this is formed 8,400 years before present, so they give a range of about 10,200 years to 6,900 years, but then to the most recent common ancestor, basically there's a mutation that will happen, but then that mutation may have happened well before your most recent common ancestor. So here we see the most recent common ancestor lives somewhere between 6,400 years and 2,300 years before present, so about 4,000 years ago. So that's a much more defined haplogroup than a 20,000 year before present haplogroup. So there's something a little odd going on if that's what's happening for you. I don't really know off the top of my head necessarily if 23andMe or CRI Genetics is more reliable than the other in terms of their haplogroup reading, but there are a lot of places that you can look to put your DNA through to see what kind of haplogroups they come up with, which I know there are sites out there that do that. I don't really know any off the top of my head. It was never really something that I did a lot because haplogroups aren't exactly the most genealogically useful thing. But I would definitely suggest looking into this with the difference of R0 versus U4A1B, assuming that I'm reading these correctly and that, you know, you didn't mean something else maybe. And you might want to go back and look and see, did any of these sites update it as well? Granted, this question's 2 years old, but it's also very common that I see that people will look at the results for one site and then get results in another site and then just never look back at the old site, even though things update all the time. On to the next one. DNA results from Suriname. I tested my mother, my father, my brother, and myself on Ancestry and MyHeritage. The sub-Saharan African DNA across all platforms is consistent, around 75 to 78% for all four of us. However, the non-African ancestry results kind of baffle me. For example, our Jewish ancestry tests significantly higher on Ancestry DNA, 8% for my mother, 6% for me, 5% for my brother, while in MyHeritage, we barely blip at less than 2%. So one test suggests that my mother had a Jewish ancestor 4 to 5 generations ago, while the other test suggests it is far more distant. What complicates results is that we may have a surname based on family lore, but we are Surinamese. Not many records from the Dutch colonial period are digitized, so it is hard to follow a paper trail. I also noticed that the OP commented a lot with more information in terms of that they do have a lot of Jewish DNA matches. And then they talk about the Jewish connection through their African side and, you know, the different family within Suriname. And then down below, the most important one, which is an update from 2 months ago. So I have an update. One of my cousins is also doing research and together filled our family tree MyHeritage with our presumed great-great-great-grandfather. He was a merchant from Amsterdam who lives briefly in Suriname. We found his family tree and added that to ours in MyHeritage. We then did a simple search on his ancestral names and found a few DNA matches whose paper trails match with our presumed ancestor's family. We can now safely assume that my great-grandmother indeed had a Jewish grandfather. So, I have a lot to say on this because I actually have a very strong connection to Suriname because I descend from Dutch Jewish family, and I have a huge contingency of my family that were living in Suriname. I have records of family moving from Amsterdam to Suriname. I've been in touch with my cousins from Suriname, as well as a bunch of other cousins who were in Jamaica, Curacao, Venezuela, and elsewhere throughout the Caribbean and South America. And I know a lot about these connections. I know a lot of the difficulty with the records. So I have a lot to say too, especially in the DNA. So to start out, I think it definitely makes sense in terms of the African being fairly consistent from each site. Because when we're talking about things on a continental level, they're usually fairly confident. But then when you get into the subregions, even though Jewish, and I know they call it Ashkenazi Jewish, but we're just going to call it Jewish because that's really more of what it represents. It's not quite as easy of a thing to decipher as African, although it still is fairly distinguishable generally. So where Jewish DNA falls is mostly within the Levant and then also a little bit in Europe. So what happens is that you get a lot of different population groups that get readings of Jewish because there's a big correlation. Biggest one being people that are in the Middle East. So in a sense, the Jewish is really a sub-region of Western Asia population groups that you could really say. And so that makes it a bit more difficult, and it makes more sense that there might be a bit more difference between sites. Now, I should say MyHeritage is the one that's notorious for people saying that it is the furthest from what they truly see. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case here, especially in the sense that, for one, there is a very strong connection between Dutch Jews and Suriname, most specifically Sephardic Dutch Jews, because there's the whole thing with Jodensavan and, all of the different plantations down there. And there were actually a lot of Jewish-held slaves from Suriname who would then become free or go to Amsterdam and somehow become free, and then they would become part of the community. And there's actually, they're discussed about in a lot of different records about, they'll literally be called mulatto or things, basically distinguishing them that they are people of color, but they will be fully integrated into the community. But a lot of these stories are, that it's much more nuanced than that. And it's something I've actually thought about doing a video of eventually, but it's it's one of those topics that's a little difficult to dance around. But based on the fact that you, your mom, and your brother are all getting Jewish DNA, the fact that you are from Suriname, I definitely think it's right. The fact that you have this 2% to, 6% for your mom, I'm assuming the 2% is probably where your mom is closer to on 23andMe. So think of it like that in terms of a range of, okay, it's about 2 to 6%. So I can look at it generally from there. So, we know great-grandparents are going to be about 12.5%. So then second great-grandparents are going to be your 6%. So second great-grandparent could be as close as that in terms of your mom's second great-grandparent. But then it could maybe the 2% is a little bit closer to the truth. And so maybe it's a little bit further out. So then, looking at third or fourth or even a fifth great-grandparent, presuming maybe that the DNA was inherited a little easier. And even more, I would say that it's probably not Ashkenazi, it's probably a Sephardi ancestor because of the much stronger connection between the Sephardic community in Amsterdam and the Sephardic community in Suriname. And that comment here where you're discussing that you did find a merchant from Amsterdam who lived briefly in Suriname, well, I can tell you the Amsterdam records are absolutely extensive, and especially when you're talking about the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam. And I don't know how well you are in terms of Dutch. I know that, a lot of people that are from Suriname do know Dutch. I know, with the Dutch colonies of Suriname, Curacao, and Indonesia, there's a lot of strong ties between all of that. And so hopefully you do. And this will be helpful. So the Amsterdam Archives is one of my favorite websites when it comes to genealogy in the Netherlands. I mean, obviously Amsterdam specifically. And they have a lot of things. They have an inventory that you can go through. They have indexes where you literally just search. They also have photographs, they have dossiers, and then they even have what's called transcribus, which is a OCR technology that reads handwriting. So it's quite amazing. So you can do searches in here to see if you can find records that might be a little bit harder to find because they haven't been properly indexed. They've just been run through this OCR technology, which is better than nothing. But the main thing is within the inventories, you want to go to the portfolio 334, Archief van de Portuguese Israëlische Gemeente, the Portuguese Jewish community, and there is an absolute amazing amount of records. So just looking in here, each one, there's a plus, and then you have all of these records, and then there'll be even more, and the records span all sorts of stuff. But the most important ones are going to be down here in number 5, and most specifically 5.2. because this is where you're going to get a lot of the different finances, information, and as well the personal information from the community. And then here we have births, circumcisions, marriages, deaths, and a lot more. So this is somewhere where you're trying to find more about that family in Amsterdam. This is one of the best ways to go. Now, what's something else that you could do? Well, you have done DNA testing, and I know that from what you said, this is from, let's see, where is it? Assume my great-grandmother indeed had a Jewish great-grandfather. So your third great-grandfather, your mom's second great-grandfather. But we're talking about this is through your great-grandmother. And why is that important? Because one of the best ways to figure this out would be through Y-DNA. So, being that it's through a great-grandmother, if you don't know who her siblings are, like let's say you don't have any male siblings for her, this may be a much more difficult task, but one of the best things to do is doing that Y-DNA testing. And basically, if it is a Jewish great-great-great-grandfather of yours, then if you find a purely patrilineal descendant of that great-great-great-grandfather, they should have the exact same Y-DNA as every single other male descendant of that great-great-great-grandfather, as well as the general family overall. So, you know, one of my main families in Amsterdam that I research is the Nunes-Vaz family. So let's say that you took a Y-DNA test and then it was the Nunes-Vaz family. Well, you would know exactly from doing a Y-DNA test that it would connect to the Nunes-Vaz family. You would see Nunes-Vaz family members as a lot of your matches. You would see the connections between Amsterdam, and then you would know, okay, now I know the name, and now you need to research to find were they in Suriname. So you already have a name, you already have a connection, so you're already a step ahead of this, and you can build out the trees and learning more about this guy and see, can you, for one, find descendants of his elsewhere that you could do Y-DNA testing, but even more, descendants within your tree. Hopefully, you know, if it's your great-grandmother, hopefully it would be through her father, and then you could get her brothers to test because they would have, or her brother's descendants to test because they should have the Y-DNA. But if this is, you know, her mother's father, then it's going to be a bit more difficult because then you're going to have to find a brother of your great-great-grandmother if they exist. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful for you, because I know this is a very difficult situation to search through, just in the sense that Suriname is really limited in what you can find there. But even more so, the fact that you're dealing with your, you know, enslaved ancestry, which just complicates things even more. On to the next one. Sephardic ancestry. So I did a genetic test and I got my father, my grandfather tested. Our shared matches all have a significant amount of Sephardic Jewish admixture on my heritage, and the European they had was either Iberian or Italian, which is not unusual for Sephardic Jews. My heritage says I'm around 20% Iberian, and living DNA says I'm 11% Southern European, being Iberian and Italian, specifically Southern Italian. My GEDmatch results, however, are fascinating and seem to suggest some Sephardic ancestry. Is there any way I can find out for certain? I'll put my GEDmatch results in the comment below. And then down here we have that comment below. They used the Eurogenes K13, which only gives you 13 different readings, but it actually looks like they used something other than K13, one of the more advanced ones. Oh no, they used multiple, okay. So they did the single population sharing one, which I never find that really useful, and then the K13 and a whole bunch of other stuff. What we're dealing with here kind of comes down to the same thing as the first question in a sense, but a little bit different. The first thing off, if you did living DNA, from what I understand, does not give any Jewish readings. So that's going to complicate things, for one, because it's going to be weird. Number two, the Sephardic Jewish admixture reading is one that's got a big question mark on it in terms of its reliability, because for one, my heritage does not release a white paper. And a white paper is basically an explanation of how they come to their findings, as well as statistical analyses of how reliable those findings are. Often they'll do what's known as precision and recalls on each population group that they define, and that's something that I talked about in another video, which maybe I'll link up here if I remember to do that. With all of that information, there's a lot to question here, because all you're looking at are admixture results, and even more admixture results through GEDmatch, which it's really what I like to call pick your own ancestry, because they have all these different calculators that do it slightly different, and you know, it's basically just each calculator is a different way to look at it. and you're going to get slightly different results with each. And then what a lot of people do is they just kind of find the one that fits their narrative the best, and then they say, okay, well, that's the one. So in terms of the genealogy stuff, it's just not helpful. So your main question here is, how can I know for certain if you do have Sephardic ancestry? And the only good answer to that is actual genealogy research. So if you're getting a certain amount of Sephardic Jewish and you're thinking, okay, that's true, then you can use that to estimate, well, how far back is this Sephardic Jewish? And then you know how far back to research to figure it out. So let's say you're getting 6% Sephardic Jewish consistently, which isn't going to happen because very few websites even define Sephardic Jewish. Well, that means that you're going to be looking for about a second great-grandparent, maybe a third great-grandparent. So you'll want to trace out every single one of your lines to every single third great-grandparent. And if that Sephardic Jewish is correct, one of those third great-grandparents, at least, if not, two of them, are Sephardic Jewish. But again, that's presuming that that's actually a correct reading. But there are a lot of sort of vague things in here in terms of, you say a significant amount of Sephardic Jewish admixture on MyHeritage. Well, what is a significant amount to you? I mean, is it 2%? Is it 5%? Is it 20%? I mean, it makes a big difference what that percentage is in terms of the reliability. But then also the fact that you're just talking about MyHeritage, which is a company very known for their unreliability in the admixture and their lack of a white paper, to GEDmatch, which is known very well for not having updated calculators for their admixtures. And, it's just, the calculators on GEDmatch were just a lot of side projects by people that weren't kept up. Some of them are basically like as old as like 2013, 2015, when a lot of this stuff was kind of in not its infancy, but pretty much its infancy, just getting out of its infancy. I mean, Ancestry had just gotten a DNA test at that point. And then the third being that the other one you're using is Living DNA, which doesn't even define Jewish. So what you'd really want to do is, if you're seeing a bunch of Sephardic Jewish matches, or, you say Sephardic or matches with Sephardic Jewish readings, which, you'll probably find that anyway necessarily. But like, if you're finding a bunch of people with actual Sephardic Jewish ancestry, and then you can build their trees and find multiple people from the same family, that's going to be the way to start to figure this out. Because then once you have a family where you're saying, okay, I have this one family where I have these 3, 4, 5, however many matches that descend from this one guy, then there's some way that you connect into that family. And it could be that it's coming from a shared Sephardic ancestry, or it also could just be something else where maybe you had an ancestor that had a sibling who then converted to become Sephardic and then had a bunch of descendants. And then this isn't even bringing up the whole idea that it might not even be Sephardic Jewish, could just be general Ashkenazi Jewish, might be Mizrahi, or it might be, something else. And the reason for that is because Jewish readings are very difficult to decipher between, and that's one reason why a lot of these DNA testing sites don't really try to even define it. You only have Family Tree DNA and MyHeritage who try to define it, and even then, like I said, there's a lot of question marks to it. And if you'd like to learn more about this, in the last video I did answering questions just like this, I talked about a lot of those issues with reading Jewish DNA, and also why it's not uncommon for a lot of people to get abnormally high occurrences of Jewish DNA readings. So be sure to check that video out right here. Thank you to my YouTube members and Patreon patrons.